now here's Joe Kraslin with a very award-winning piece. He hasn't really won an award, but it should. The Eastland disaster.
It happened 88 years and 1 week ago today. The Eastland disaster on the Chicago River. When you think about Chicago's history, the Eastland rarely comes to mind, but it is Chicago's most terrible tragedy. More people died on the bank of the Chicago River than in any other time in our city's history. The Eastland was a pleasure ship known as the Speed Queen of the Great Lakes. On July 24, 1915, the Eastland was rented by the Western Electric Company for an Employees' Day. The plan was to dock in the Chicago River at the Clark Street Bridge, and then set sail to Michigan City, Indiana, for a day of festivities and picnicking for employees and their families. Between 6:30 and 7:10 a.m., passengers boarded the ship to its capacity of 2,500. The Eastland was built in 1902 and set sail in May of 1903. In July, the first tragedy struck. It crashed its stern into a tugboat. By winter, the draft was reduced on the ship and air conditioning was added. In 1904, on a returning trip from South Haven, the ship lists to its port and then starboard side with 3,000 passengers on board. This meant the ship rocked to its left, port, and then to its right, starboard. Due to this listing, the Eastland's capacity was reduced to 2,800 passengers from 3,300. In September of that same year, more alterations were made to reduce draft. Then, in August 1906, the Eastland lists again to its starboard side, and a formal complaint was filed. Once again, passenger capacity was reduced by 400. In the spring of 1912, its smokestacks were reduced by 33%, and then in July, for the third time, the ship lists. And in September of 1914, due to the sinking of the Titanic, more lifeboats are added to the deck, making the vessel top-heavy and adding more than 10 tons in weight. When spring of 1915 rolled around, more alterations were made to the Eastland. Concrete was laid on 2 separate decks to strengthen the wood that was rotting, adding several tons in weight to the ship. It was a beautiful summer day on Saturday, July 24th, 1915. The time was 6:30 a.m. More than 5,000 employees and family members of the Western Electric Company gathered near the Chicago River at the Clark Street Bridge. The jovial crowd was ready to enjoy the short trip to Michigan City for a day of picnicking and rest as they began to board the Eastland, just one of 3 ships rented for the day's activities. 45 minutes later, the ship reached its capacity of 2,500 passengers. But even before all the picnickers boarded, the ship began to list slightly. By 7:16, the chief engineer noticed the listing and tried to even out the ship by bringing in water to one side. At 7:24, Captain Penderson prepares the Eastland for departure and requests the Clark Street Bridge open. He is denied by the bridge attendant, who notices a 25-degree list in the ship. 3 minutes later, passengers are asked to move to the starboard side to help calm the listing. Panic did not strike the passengers until 7:28, more than 1 minute later, when the ship reached a 45-degree list. Seconds later, the Eastland rolled into the Chicago River, trapping everyone below deck. The Great Chicago Fire took 300 lives. The Eastland took 844 souls, including men, women, and children. 22 whole families were killed. The Eastland disaster caused the second largest loss of life in any accident in U.S. history, even though the Chicago River was only 20 feet deep. Lifeboats were not deployed due to the quickness of the capsize. Help began to crowd the ship's hull, rescuing survivors through portholes and cutting open the hull with blowtorches. As victims began to be pulled from the wreck, the Reed Murdoch building was used as a temporary morgue before the floating morgue was constructed. After the last body was recovered and the crowd dispersed, weeks later, the Eastland was raised and towed to South Chicago. The Navy bought the ship and refitted it as a training vessel and renamed it the Wilmette, where it stayed in use until 1947 and then sold for scrap. No one reason was ever given for the Eastland's list and fatal roll, but as in almost every instance of tragedy, it was a collection of problems. On the morning of July 24th, 1915, 88 years and 1 week ago today, lives were cut short in one of the city's and our nation's greatest disasters.
Here's everyone's favorite, Chunks of Conrad!
He's our favorite weatherman. Who? Mornings on WGN. Who?
And it's a fabulous weather office, isn't it?
It is, but the thing that concerns me also is the picture of Pam Zeckman luring over.
Right, I believe they dated for like 6 weeks. It was all physical, and so then they broke up. But she's a hottie. I'll tell you.
He's our favorite weatherman.
This has been a presentation of Opie Productions.
Tony, can you shut up?
Five,
It's TV for you.
3, 2.